Hello and welcome to the masterclass session of the Human-Centered Design Thinking, which is part of the Master of Design and Master of Interaction Design and Electronic Arts. So today our presenters are Associate Professor Lian Lok, who is the Program Director for Master of Interaction Design and Electronic Art, and Associate Professor Martin Tomic, who is the Head of Design at the School of Architecture, Design and Planning at the University of Sydney. My name is Firas Salan, and I'm the Faculty Liaison Manager for the School of Law and School of Architecture, Design and Planning at the University of Sydney. So in a couple of minutes, I'll hand over to our dear Associate Professor. Before I thought we thought of telling you some housekeeping matters, So we have the Q&A function that is at the bottom of your screen. So please use that function and we will endeavor to respond to your inquiries towards the end. So we'll have the last 10 to 15 minutes to respond to your inquiries. So the chat box will be monitored, but I would really suggest that you put all your questions in the Q&A box. And now to you, Associate Professor Lian Lok and Associate Professor Martin Tomic.
Thank you very much, Faris. Welcome, everyone. I think we have about 67 participants out there, so we can't see your faces, but welcome to our masterclass. Martin Tomic and myself are very much looking forward to sharing our knowledge about design thinking. What we'll be covering in a session, within the 1 hour session, is the following. We'll start by looking at some of the future trends that are impacting on society, business design and technology. And that will frame as well the importance of design thinking as a really valuable method for problem solving in today's society. We'll tell you what our approach to human-centered design is, which is what we teach in our courses here, and illustrate that through some examples. We'll also run you through a success story of a case study that's come out of student work in our courses that's been supervised by Martin and has actually ended up resulting in a commercial product. We'll then conclude with a quick overview of the history of design thinking in our school and what's happening in parallel in society, the greater world. And then we'll finish with Q&A. So then it'll be your turn to ask us lots of questions, which we'll endeavor to answer. Now, what we're doing though, sort of about halfway through this presentation, is we're going to do a short, fun exercise. It's a sketching exercise. And if you wish to participate, all you need is a pen or pencil and a sheet of paper. Or if you happen to have like a drawing tablet, like an iPad or a Surface with you can pull that out. So feel free to join in that exercise. You don't have to, but it'll give you a quick taste of design thinking and sketching for ideation. Just to give you some context about the design school that you'll be joining in our faculty or in our school, it's called Design Lab. Martin and I have been both working here and teaching courses for quite a number of years. We also do design research, and we have a very productive exchange between our research and our teaching or education. So our research, in summary, explores the role of design for innovation and also how we go about envisioning, defining, and informing interactions and experiences between people and digital technologies. So you can see that the courses that we teach are very much the ones you're interested in, and you'll be able to meet our researchers because they also teach in our courses. Some of our key research areas are interaction design, creative technology, and design innovation. The school is growing. We have in Design Lab about 21 academics at the moment and over 20 PhD researchers. So it's a really fabulous, lively environment and friendly environment for you to join as students. We do have a range of design degrees here. We have undergraduate degrees of Bachelor of Design Computing, but the ones you'll be primarily interested in tonight are our postgraduate offerings. The Master of Interaction Design and Electronic Arts degree. I'm the program director for that one. And our newest offering, which is a Master of Design in either Design Innovation or Strategic Design. So later on, you can ask us questions about either of those courses. So looking at the big picture, we do position our courses, our design education courses, very much at the cutting edge of where the world and industry are moving, and position them at the intersection of business, design, and technology. So it's interesting to look at some of the future trends that are coming up, which a lot of them, as you can see, are very much driven by new technological innovations and the advent of AI, artificial intelligence, all these kinds of facial recognition, surveillance technologies that are becoming more and more embedded into everyday products and services that we'll encounter, both in our working lives, but also in our personal and public and leisure time. So some interesting things like, moving from the Internet of Things to the Internet of Bodies, as our bodies themselves actually become part of the interface of network systems. This idea of digital doubles, where we end up having 3D digital scans of a lot of our body data that then become how we interact with different systems and services. Artificial intelligence, as we know, robots are on the rise, but instead of seeing as something that's going to take over humans on the planet, a lot of forward thinking is thinking about how they can be used to collaborate with, how they can augment human skills and actually be helpful collaborative technologies or companions. The next three trends are really, I think, what we're all experiencing right now at the moment in this COVID-19 situation, where the way we're living has been heavily impacted, is the ideas of being more conscious and more ethically aware about the choices we make, both in what we buy, purchase, how we live our lives, and if you're actually in business, the kinds of business decisions and directions that you're moving in. So much more towards environmentally aware, sustainable planet initiatives. And interestingly, for human-centered design thinking, moving from a me to a we, so from user-centered design to what's now being called life-centered design. And you'll be pleased to know that a lot of us in research and teaching are already looking at these shifts that are coming in these future trends, and you'll be experiencing through our courses as well. Over to Martin.
Thank you, Leanne. So I think that's really something that's really an advantage of coming to the University of Sydney, where we have a very rich research culture and program. And as Leanne said, we're really able to bring our research also into the classroom. And we personally feel that's very important because when we are teaching design, we really want to make sure, especially as we're teaching UX design and design innovation, that we're at the forefront of the fields. And so really sort of like equipping people that are coming through our programs for the future of work that is quite unknown at this point in time. So again, our research can sort of like a little bit help us predict what's going to happen in the next few years and equipping the students that come through our programs now already for that future. So we wanted to start the session by looking at design as a way of thinking and talking a little bit more about the process behind using design for problem solving. So to start with the basics, when we work on a design problem and try to come up with a solution that responds to this problem, we have to usually go through some form of process that might involve a number of steps. So for example, this might involve the steps of learning everything we can about the problem, creating solutions, and then testing those solutions in order to come up with the final solution. But as you can imagine, that's not necessarily a linear process. So rather in design, we are talking about this being a circular process or an iterative process. So you might be going through these steps several times in order to refine the solution that we're working on, and in order to come with a solution that really addresses the original problem in the best possible way. Or in other words, when we are working on a design problem and going through this process using design methods and tools, it really isn't a linear process. We very often find ourselves getting lost along the way, and the process might really look much more like something like this. And that's really important actually, because getting lost is an important step in the design process. So we might find ourselves lost and might have to backtrack to where we were. But every time we get lost, every time we do that, we learn something new during that process, and that can then feed back, that insight can feed back into the design process and into the final solution. And so we're talking about these different terms. Usually when we're teaching design, where we're looking at the context within which the problem is situated. We're doing research using various design methods to better understand the problem and the needs of the users and other stakeholders, to then turn those into ideas before developing concepts that are then fleshed out as prototypes and then tested in order to come up with the final product. Bill Buxton, a senior researcher at Microsoft, also talks about the design process being a process that involves both elaboration and reduction. Or in other words, he suggests that design involves both divergent thinking and also convergent thinking. So divergent thinking is this first part that you can see on the left here, where we are seeking new opportunities. We're trying to come up with lots of different ideas and broaden our understanding, our horizon. But at some stage, we have to narrow down to a specific solution, and that's a reduction process. That's the process of convergent thinking. We're trying to eliminate ideas, we're trying to combine ideas, and by testing and through testing ideas and evaluating ideas, coming up with one specific solution that really addresses the problem in the best possible way. What's quite interesting and maybe worth also pointing out here, though, is that in design, through a design process, when we're working on complex design problems, that's quite different to solving a scientific problem. So typically in design, there's not one single solution that we come up with, but there are multiple different solutions that are possible solutions to a design problem. And as designers, we learn how to evaluate these different solutions in order to find the one that might best fit the particular context. Another quite popular model that was popularized by the UK Design Council is known as the double diamond. And that model actually suggests that we are going through this process of divergent and convergent thinking twice, hence the two diamonds. And so that way we are able to, so what this suggests is that the first step really is to better understand the problem area that we're working on and to identify the specific problem that we're working on that we should be solving before starting with ideation and prototyping. Or in other words, the first diamond is really about finding the right problem before then finding the right solution. And that's really important, and a mistake that many people often make, that they jump straight into finding a solution to the problem they're working on before actually questioning whether it's the right problem we're trying to solve, and to maybe try to better understand what the underlying problems might be that we really have to address in order to come up with a solution that actually works. So design thinking gives us both the tools, but also very importantly, a mindset to be able to deal with uncertainty. Not just that, but also to be comfortable with uncertainty long enough so that we can explore different aspects of a problem area. And often what we find as designers, and if you're working in this industry already, you might be very familiar with this. And also our students are really sort of like thrown into this for all the studios that they're doing as part of the program. At the beginning of working, when we're starting to work on a design project, we might find ourselves in like a very messy situation, which you can see here on the left in this diagram, and there's no way out. It's not quite clear where we go out and how we go out. And it's design thinking is really about understanding then which tools we can use to find clarity within all of that. But again, also really being able to have this ability to be comfortable, to feel comfortable with the uncertainty and complexity. That's really something that makes designers quite unique in the industry, having that ability. But when we are going through design thinking process, really what we're focusing on in many ways is understanding human values, understanding the needs of our users and customers and other stakeholders. But what this diagram suggests is that in order for an innovation to be successful, it's really important that we have both all these three factors in place, so that we understand human values and address those, but that we can also ensure that what we're coming up with is technically feasible and is also viable in a business sense. More recently, though, and this links back to what Lian said earlier about future trends and moving towards life-centered design, we are more recently talking about this idea of responsible innovation, where we're adding another bubble here, another consideration, which is around environmental and ethical values. And thinking about our responsibility as designers, about what we're creating and how what we're creating is being used in practice and affecting people's lives, and also the lives of others, including planetary health. So that's where environmental values also become very important to consider. And back to Leanne.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Let's zoom in on the human-centered design process. This is one of the core things that we teach in our degrees here, often through project-based work or in the studio, design studio. This is a very classic diagram of what a human-centered design process might look like, where you can see that there are these 4 basic activities that happen before we start actually coming up with any kind of design solution. As Martin's already talked about, we need to understand what is the context or the problem space that we're operating in. And so that first bubble at the top, identifying needs, establishing requirements, in a way is where we've done the research and now we're coming up with a specification. To the left, you would then come up with your ideas, concepts, designs, and then build some kind of prototype, build an interactive version. Where mainly we're dealing with interactive technologies here in our courses, and then go through some sort of testing or evaluation process. And for each of these activities, there's a lot of different methods and tools you can use, which we won't go into this evening. You'll have to come and enroll in our degrees to find out what they are. But there's not just one way of doing things, but there are these sort of core activities that go through, and you can see they're very cyclic. They're iterative. So you don't just go through this process once, you go back and forth, you test things, you remake, you might even rethink your requirements. But in a human-centered or user-centered design approach, of course, what is key is actually involving users as much as possible in the process. That may not always be straightforward or easy, and so there are different methods to do that. If you're lucky enough to be able to have direct contact with your target end users, then you can actually invite them in to be part of the design process. If not, then you may have to conduct user research and actually find ways of representing users and making sure that their needs are kept alive throughout the design process. And so there are tools like personas and scenarios that you may be familiar with, have become very commonplace in industry that use that sort of purpose. So you can see in terms of evaluating as well, so you might have what you think is a great idea, a working prototype, or maybe something in between, that you really need to test and test often. You often hear that phrase, you know, to fail often, to test fast, fail often. And that's really about learning through testing and evaluating, hopefully with the types of people that will end up using the products or services that you're designing. And then even in the coming up with the design ideas and refining the design concept and the kinds of interactions and components that might take place of it, you may be able to actually co-design with the users. So more and more work practices are moving towards trying to actually involve end users in the actual co-design process themselves. So you probably may have come across co-design as a more recent addition to the design activities that take place. We're now going to play a short video that is of a couple of our graduates that have ended up working for some key organizations out there. I'll let them do the speaking.
I think we can't hear the audio, Leanne. No, I think you might have to share, change the possibly in the setting in Zoom.
Oh, sorry. So that's why we use search.
I think maybe we'll skip the video and we can share the link later.
About making sure that the user at the end of our products or uses them every day feels like they are doing their best work.
Okay, so that was a few people from industry and our graduates giving you a glimpse into how their organizations actually go about trying to understand user needs and the problems that they want to design for, the opportunities that are there. And so that's actually a really important part of what we teach in our courses. We do teach a lot of user research, user experience, design approaches, and that filter through into the kinds of projects and assessments that we ask you as students to participate in. So here's a cute sort of cartoon graphic that I think really nicely depicts the kind of common problem of trying to ask people what it is they think is wrong and what they would like fixed. I think Steve Jobs and Apple was quite notorious for saying we don't ask users what they want, but we teach you how to actually go about finding what are the real needs of people that you're designing for. So for example, this might be what you asked a user what they might like, and they might say, well, this is a swing, this is what it looks like, this is what I would like, something like this to be designed. Marketing though took over and went out and did some surveys and decided that actually this is what the swing would look like. It required 3 planks rather than 1. It then went into one of the internal organizations in the company who then were going into a requirement specification phase. And if anyone's actually worked in, for example, software development companies, before Agile really took over, Agile methodologies took over, this is really what happened. There was a lot of time spent on trying to get these requirements very correct. But often there end up being quite a divergence between what the user really wanted and how people inside the company or the software developers thought that the product should be built. So you can see it when it goes into another department, maybe some of the designers come in, maybe they've got some great creative ideas and they think, well, it'd be even better if we added all these different pieces to it and we did something interesting with the structure and so forth. And you can see we're starting to really move away from what the user had originally described. Then the work gets handed over to the software developers, and somehow they've got that specification requirement, they've got the design diagrams, and then they're doing a little bit of extra work in there as well, interpreting how to actually build the design. And you can see we're getting into some very strange territory here, perhaps with a lot of additional requirements that deal with making things robust and fail-proof and idiot-proof and things like that. But then when the product goes back out, that final product's gone back out to the user, they go, that's not actually what I wanted at all. What I really wanted was something like this. I wanted a swing tire that's like really fun to play on. And this, even though it's a cartoon, it's actually emblematic of a quite common problem that has been encountered in industry, and hence why the user experience has become so critical in design thinking methodologies, and many companies that have digital products are very much embraced human-centered design thinking and user experience methodologies to make sure that they don't go through this process and end up with a very costly wrong product that doesn't please anybody.
So just to show you that that's actually a methodology that is used by large companies around the world, we wanted to quickly talk through this example of Facebook's reactions. So anyone who's using Facebook, and I know Facebook is not available in all of the countries around the world, for anyone who's familiar with Facebook, you might have seen those reactions that appeared a few years ago. And so this is a case study is based on a great article that was published in the Wired magazine about the user-centered design process behind coming up with these reactions. And this was actually a response from Facebook to the demand from users that have asked for years for a dislike button. Because often people share something in the network that they want to respond to, but they don't want to like it because it's maybe really sad or it's something that they actually disagree with. And Facebook was actually responded quite well in a moral sense to that request by refusing to have a dislike button because they were worried that it would encourage bullying on their platform. So people feeling bullied because they get a lot of dislikes rather than likes. And so instead they looked into, okay, what are the reactions that we could display on our network, on our platform, and what are the reactions that our users would like to share? And so they did, what they did, for example, was they investigated, they analyzed posts that were made on Facebook at the time. And because there was just a like button, a lot of people then used stickers in order to respond to a post. And so they analyzed all the stickers and they categorized them into common emotions. They also worked with an expert in cognitive psychology and emotions. And eventually they came up with those 6 different emotions, or 5 in addition to the like button, that they wanted to convey on the platform. And then they created lots of different versions, lots of different iterations. You can see some of them on the screen here. And they started testing them with selected groups of users, tried to really ensure that people actually understand what those emotions mean, which can be quite difficult if you have only like a very small space to convey that. And it also has to work on a mobile phone, for example, where the screen is even smaller. And then they were, before rolling it out fully in the platform, they were testing it in some of the smaller countries. Because as you can imagine, a platform like Facebook has a lot of users, billions of users, actually. And if something goes wrong there, if you design something that has a negative reaction from the user group or is not adopted, it can really harm the usefulness of a platform like that. And so then they came up with this final version of the reactions that you might be familiar with if you're a Facebook user. And you can see they also added very subtle animations to support better what each of those emojis tries to convey. And so again, there was a human-centered, a user-centered design process behind that. And it's really used by all the big companies around the world to inform the design of products that are customer and user-facing. And it really helps to ensure the success and adoption of those products and services.
Okay, so let's have a look at some of the key methods that we use in design thinking. One of them is sketching. If I could see your faces, I'd ask you to put your hands up if you think you're good at drawing, but it actually doesn't matter. And you don't actually need to be good at drawing or think that you're particularly creative to learn how to sketch. It's one of the things we teach when you do a design thinking course, how to very quickly sketch your ideas. And this is also founded on this notion that through sketching, you're actually helping your imagination and you engage in a kind of reflective conversation with the material and the ideas that you're coming through, and you can actually come up with more ideas by sketching. Let's have a look at an example of some student work. So you can see here, this one here, it's very much looks like a cartoon. It's a storyboard where you can get a sense of what the character is, what they might be doing, what their activity is. And this particular one was one of the initial concept sketches for one of the briefs that I actually set for MIDS students in the big studio, which was designing for a skate park. And they had to come up with different ideas about how digital technologies, artistic displays of sound and visuals could be modulated by motion sensors. So that was the basic brief, but there were lots of different ideas students came up with. And this is one that obviously you can see it's a little bit like it's the Simpsons featured here. But the basic idea is captured just through some simple sort of cartoon sketching. Or you can also do things like do wireframes or just basic sketching like this for, of course, mobile apps and all kinds of screens. Anything really can be sketched. It is something that we encourage you to practice and to learn so you can quickly communicate and express your ideas, either if you're working solo or if you're working in a group or a team. So Bill Planck, who is a renowned interaction design researcher who's currently at Stanford University in the States, he has some fabulous some lectures and videos of him actually, this idea of actually sketching to think that he can do. He can tell a story and augment it with his very shorthand sketches. But for you as designers, or is this idea of building up a visual vocabulary and just practicing using very simple shapes and symbols that you can then just put together and compose into, as you can see, these representations of people like stick people, cars and vehicles and objects and the places that you might actually interact with people and technologies. I hand over to Martin now.
Yeah, so this is the point where we'll have a short exercise for you to do. So for anyone who joined us late, if you can grab a piece of paper and a pen, it can just be a blank piece of A4 paper, or maybe you've got a notebook in front of you, or just use the back of a receipt even. Or if you've got a tablet with a pencil, you can also use that as well, and just to draw on that. And again, it's really important to realize that in order to work as a UX designer or in the area of design innovation and to do design thinking, you don't have to be great at sketching. You don't have to be an artist. You don't have to be great at artistic drawings. Anyone can sketch, really. It's this idea that anyone can sketch. And that sketching, as Leanne said, helps us to think through, to think and to come up with solutions. And this exercise is a bit of a warm-up exercise, but it also shows you that it aims to show you that anyone can sketch, really. That's quite easy. So hopefully everyone has a piece of paper by now and a pen or some drawing tool. And so you'll have a series of tasks, and you'll have 10 seconds for each of those tasks. It's very quick. And really don't worry about the quality of your sketches, because we are not even there to see them. So no one can see your artworks that you're creating in this session. It's really just for you, for yourself. So usually would give you a template that we've developed where you can sketch into these boxes. We can't easily distribute it to you in a virtual form. So again, if you have a piece of paper, make sure that you can fit all of those sketches onto the piece of paper. So they can be quite small sketches. All right, so I hope everyone has their piece of paper or something in front of them to draw. I really encourage you to join in. And the first one is a warm-up exercise, and I'm giving you 10 seconds to draw a building. And the timer is starting now. So draw a building, whatever comes to your mind. Maybe it's a building you're living in, the building you go to work, or a building in a neighborhood. And that is 10 seconds up. And so the next task, which is the first task, is to draw a door. Again, you got 10 seconds for that one. So just draw a door. I think about the features of the door maybe, and time is up. Number 2, draw a door that can let the cat in, and the time is starting. So again, it's a door, but this time it's a door that a cat can also use to get through. And time is up. So number 3, draw a door that allows you to see who is on the other side. Again, time is starting. So it's a door you can use to get in the building, but you can also see through the door to see who is on the other side of the door without opening it. Time's up. Number 4, draw a door that allows you to see who is on the other side, but also allows for privacy. So you want to be able to see through that door, but you want to make sure no one else can see from the outside in. Okay, and time's up. It's very fast. Next one, number 5. Draw a door that allows for wheelchair access. So someone sitting in a wheelchair, someone using a wheelchair, how can they get through that door that you're drawing right now? And again, time is up. Number 6, draw a door to put large items through. So again, it's a door into a building, but it also allows you to bring large items through that door. And time's up. Number 7, draw a door that has air ventilation. So a door that you can use to also get air into that room that the door leads to. And time's up. Number 8, draw a door that offers secure access only to people who are permitted to get in. So only people who are allowed to get into the room can open the door. What would that door look like? Again, sketch it out, and time's up. Number 9, draw a door that provides access to the roof. So this time it's a door that you can use to walk out onto the roof of the building. What would that door look like? Okay, and time's up. And number 10, draw a door to a backyard. So what would a door into a building look like that leads into a backyard? And again, time's up. And now look at all the doors that you sketched that hopefully you have in front of you if you participate in this activity. And think about how many different door models did you come up with? Are some of them similar, or do they all look quite different? Probably quite a few of them are quite different because they each address a specific problem. And that's very typical in design, that every design solution we come up with has to address a very unique problem and has to be really specifically designed to address that problem. But also have a look at the building you drew at the beginning of this exercise and see whether the doors that you then came up with would fit into that building. Do they work with that building, or do they not at all match that building that you drew at the beginning? And so this shows us that, or reminds us that everything we're designing is used in a bigger context. So whether it's a door or a mobile app or a website, all these applications are being used in a particular context, and it's really important that they're designed with that context in mind. So I'm handing back to Lian here to talk about prototyping as the next step in the design process.
Yes, luckily I did that exercise just saying because I haven't done it before. That was quite, luckily I had a really big building to start with. So with back to the types of methods that you might use, these key activities. So we talked about, that was an example just then of doing sketching, and really fast, rapid sketching. So it's pretty interesting to see how quickly you can get an idea out. You might not have even been thinking about anything, and then you were given a prompt, and then you thought of something and you were able to draw it. But once you've gone through that, more the ideas phase, the ideation stage, where you're coming up with ideas, you have to settle on some ideas to refine and flesh out into proper concept solutions. And then we need to make those ideas tangible. We need to put them into a form using different kinds of materials that we can actually share with our design team, share with our potential users and other stakeholders, to get feedback on them, to find out, is this actually a good solution to the problem that we've been tackling. So prototyping comes in many very different forms. I'm going to show you a couple of examples from our student work. So this is again from a studio project where students were designing for playful, creative interactions and using some of the existing building infrastructure. So I'm just going to make this one animate. So these students actually visually, digitally animated their idea before building it in the kinds of materials and technologies which it would be in its final form. So you can do a lot of thinking, a lot of creative work and testing and evaluation, even with these kinds of mock-ups, digital mock-ups, and ones that are also animated as well. Another example here is you might be designing, for example, a solution. This one in particular was intended for autistic children to help them communicate and monitor their emotions, because some autistic children are known to have difficulties with processing their emotions. And so one of the students actually came up with this idea and managed to prototype it in different kinds of materials and technologies, as you can see here. So through this prototyping process, it's very common to work with different, what we call fidelity of the prototype. So how true is that prototype to what the final product will be in terms of function as well as materials. But you can do many things along the way before you actually build that thing. Often, usually the final product is very expensive to build as well. So what can we do using simulations, using prototyping tools, using low-cost materials? And for example, here you can see we have a wearable here on the left on this t-shirt, which has been embedded with wearable Arduino LilyPad electronics. I think it also has some sensors built into it. And then that data is pulled from there across into a mobile app and a desktop application where the student has gone through interface design and looked at how to represent the data and what kinds of interactions or interactive experience the user would have with those applications there. So we teach all these core things. We teach interface design, designing for web applications, for mobiles as well, because they're very much bread and butter in terms of common digital products out there today, as well as a lot of companies are also, it's their core business. So you do, when you learn design thinking, often it can be looking at these kinds of applications as well. Another example from an MIDS student here, this particular one was looking at how we could leverage public furniture or infrastructure that was in the public domain. This, for example, is a telephone box with a digital advertising screen on it. And you can see the two green squares are actually they're tiles that convert kinetic energy into electricity and data. So the idea here was that how can we actually make people use physical activity? For example, you might get in those tiles, you might run or jog or jump up and down, to actually convert that into a charge that then could be used to, for example, charge a mobile phone or contribute back to some sort of energy grid. And so the student here actually used ideas around gamification. So using gameplay techniques, and this visual interface that you can see as an idea, as a concept of something that might work in this public domain. So the student in our course actually built working prototypes of the digital interface display and did connect it up into those tiles. It was all done in the lab, so we didn't actually weren't able to put it into that public furniture, but it's been mocked up so you can see what it looks like as intended.
So I might skip this story to make sure we've got enough time for the Q&A and go straight to the idea of reframing, which is really important in design, in the design process. And this is a bit more advanced in terms of methods and approaching design. So it's not something that our students would necessarily learn in the first semester already. It requires a lot of practice too, but it is really important to realize that the first problem that we are trying to solve is often not the actual problem. And so reframing encourages us to look at a problem from a different perspective. And again, the different methods in design that we can use to achieve that. And I'll jump straight to the case study, which is also an example of reframing. Where reframing was used by some of our students. So this case study started in one of our units that I taught a few years ago. And it was linked to some of my research at the time, and asked students to come up with solutions that help to stop or reduce littering in cities. So littering is a big problem in cities around the world. People putting the rubbish straight on the street, and the rubbish might end up in the ocean and cause pollution. It costs cities a lot of money to clean up the streets. So it's a big problem to solve. And so this particular student team reframed the problem by, rather than thinking about how can we stop people from littering and get them to do the right thing, they started asking themselves the question, how can we turn putting rubbish into a bin into a more playful activity, and that way encourage people to do the right thing and stop littering. And so again, to show you some of the tools that they used, some of the methods they used during that process, during the research phase, they were observing people in the city, and then they used sketching here and the storyboard to describe the current situation, what's happening, where people are maybe a bit mindless about where the rubbish goes. They then also used sketching and again storyboards to come up with ideas and to explore different ideas in a very conceptual way, which is where they first started thinking about this reframe problem in terms of like turning the bin into a game. So allowing people to play Tetris by putting rubbish into a bin. This is a mock-up. So they then turned this idea into concept. So again, like we saw before with Lian's examples, this shows what this would look like in an actual urban environment and how people could interact with this bin. The students also found some LEDs that were lying around in our lab and found the bin, and then created their own very quick and basic prototype of what this would look like, so that it would allow them to test their solution with people in an actual scenario. So they put this out in front of our building in Sydney, in our school in Sydney, and started observing how people would start interacting with this light bin, where that allowed people to play Tetris on the bin. They also put it into different spaces, like inside our school, and also quickly started seeing that all this playful behavior started emerging in terms of how people started engaging with that object. We then further subsequently submitted this to the Vivid Sydney Light Festival here in Sydney. So it's a big annual festival, and we got some funding with the students together to develop 2 versions of this bin and exhibit it during the festival for 3 weeks, where millions of people came through and interacted with this prototype. So it's a really great experience for those students, and you can see here the more refined prototype that we built with LEDs and the installation of the bin at Circular Quay here in Sydney. And what was really exciting was that Stephen Bay, one of the students, who was an international student from China working on this project, one of 3 people working on this project, he then subsequently applied for a program with BMW and went to New York to continue working on this project. He got some funding to develop a company called Sense City. And you can see him here standing on the right, together with Evan Chen, one of the other students on the left. And they're now running this company, which has offices in New York, in Beijing, in Shenzhen, and here in Sydney. And they developed a commercial version of this bin, which you can see there, that they're running, that they have installed in a few places around the world. And they've also done, through the company Sense City, quite a number of other large projects in China and in other places around the world. So it's a great example that sort of shows how following this design thinking process, you can come up with a completely new product. And that hopefully also shows you that this way of working as a user experience designer, as a UX designer, and working on innovation and coming up with innovative ideas, it's quite a unique form of working in industry. It's quite different to being, say, an architect or being a graphic designer. It's quite a different skill. It's also very much sought after in industry. So our graduates, if they're really keen to work in this industry, they often get internships while they're still a student with us. We've got a great network with companies, and they often have a job before they graduate. Or like in this case with Stephen, they create their own companies. So I'll hand back to Lian here to wrap it up by talking about design thinking at our university and more broadly in our society.
Okay, we thought it would actually be helpful to give you more historical context into design thinking and how at our actual school it has been a very active area of design research actually since the 60s. So back in 1969, we have this idea of design as a very unique way of thinking, as a productive way of thinking, going about problem solving, actually was in a lot of debate, and there were a lot of texts and people in that field, especially coming out of architecture and industrial design, that were looking at this way. Design as a way of thinking being different to the arts and to the sciences, and have value in its own right. But if you look over on the left, we can see that our faculty of architecture actually appointed John Gero in 1966, and he was actually working with computers at that stage and very interested in understanding how you could use computer-aided design and modeling to look at the design process or how designers worked, and to perhaps supplement how they went about designing with computers. Quite radical back in the 60s. So there he is, actually, John Gero with a huge Sun workstation somewhere in our building back then. So you can see here as well that I'm not going to go through these in detail, but through the decades, design thinking was conceived in different ways. It went through various evolutions as a method of, say, creative action, then started to be looked at as a business strategy development. And then in the 1990s, also this idea of wicked problems as design as being a very productive way of looking at large, complex problems that weren't easily solvable. And this was the idea that design thinking could actually offer some way forward there. So you can see that all those different ways of thinking about design, if actually we fast forward to the current date of 2020, you could look around now and say that design thinking, human-centered design has become really quite mainstream in industry. And possibly also because, or in parallel with the widespread digitization of products, services, and processes. So much of what we do in working in daily life is now through computers in different forms, or our mobile phones, that many companies and organizations are now really having to think about the digital and think about the user and the user experience. It's no longer confined to just an elite set of professional workers using computers, but they're now incredibly widespread, as you'd all know. But what we also want to point out on this slide is in our school that, as we mentioned at the beginning, we're very active in design research and design education, and there's a lot of very productive flow between the two. I think even with Martin's example of the case study of Tetra Bin as well, a great example of research and design education coming together. And we have a number of courses that have evolved since the early 2000s, with our latest one in this year actually launching a major in biological design, so a whole new frontier there as well. Okay, we're just getting very close to Q&A time. Do we want to quickly mention the book, Martin?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly run through this. So to help us teach design in all of the programs and across the university, a few of us came together and published a book on design methods a couple of years ago. And so we're using that with our students. It's a collection of 60 methods along with exercises and templates that are available for free actually on this website, designthinkmakebreakrepeat.com. So you can just jump up there, download your own templates and start using them. The sketching template is up there, for example. We also, based on the book, developed a free online course that is available through Coursera. So if you go to Coursera/learn/innovation through design, or you can just search for our university, the University of Sydney, you can find this design course, where you also talk a bit more about the fundamentals of design thinking and take participants through this design process.